Today's topic is connecting systems 20 times faster with NoCode. And what we're going to do is we're going to break down what that actually means a bit, and we'll look at the various different areas that are covered by connecting systems. And we'll also dive into what is NoCode, how can we leverage NoCode to make connecting systems and systems integration easier and faster. And then finally, we'll have a look at some examples, and we'll move on to some Q&A at the end. So to start off with, we're going to pick apart the title, and we're going to look in particular at NoCode. So before we get really started into that, what I'd like to do is just flash this statistic up in front of everyone. Now, the one that really stands out to me is the second stat that we have on the slide here, which says that 63% of IT executives say that their company has more than 100 different systems in use. Now, when we're talking about connecting systems, you want all of your systems to be able to communicate and talk to each other in a way that works for your business. And the more systems you have in play, then the more difficult and the more of a challenge that this poses. So what we're going to look at then is how we can use NoCode to tackle this particular problem. So what is NoCode? So NoCode is a phrase that captures any sort of system which allows you to perform digital transformation without requiring any knowledge of code and without requiring any code to be written. This means that you take away the high barriers to entry, such as setting up development environments, getting skilled people into your organization, or outsourcing it where you don't have the skills in-house to do so. It also means you don't have to worry about deployment, hosting, any of this stuff that is typically associated with a digital transformation or more traditionally associated with high code solutions. NoCode also is encapsulated very commonly by blocks that snap together. You can think very much of NoCode as kind of Lego blocks, where you can snap them together to build something much more significant. But each block that you snap together is just a small item that's kind of a small block that is wrapped some functionality that typically would require someone like a developer or someone technical to have constructed it within the first place. This is just a summary of what NoCode can allow you to do. And this summary is done by the Project Management Institute, or PMI, and they're looking at particular interest with NoCode in a movement that's been called the citizen developer movement. So empowering people who don't necessarily have an IT background or a technical background to build and actually form these digital systems that would have required high code before. So why are we interested in NoCode? What makes NoCode more kind of special? What makes NoCode better than the alternative, which is high code or outsourcing this kind of digital transformation work to outside of your organization? So a typical misconception about NoCode is actually that you don't have to be technically minded to be able to be productive with NoCode. And to a certain extent, this is true. NoCode certainly lowers the barrier to entry. You don't really have to be the world's foremost expert in coding to be productive and build amazing things with a no-code platform. But what no-code does allow is it allows you to be more productive. Whether you have development experience or not, having these pre-configured blocks of functionality allows you to move much, much faster than hand coding everything yourself. And so that is one of the core benefits of a no-code platform, is that you can afford to move at a much faster pace in terms of development, testing, and finally deployment. And what this means is you can have a very rapid iteration cycle. It means that you can get a product out to your testers faster than before. It also means that you can get a solution out to the end user much faster. And any feedback that they then have can be addressed in a much faster fashion than a traditional software lifecycle would allow for. It also allows you to cover areas of digital transformation that you may not have any expertise or experience in before. No-code platforms provide every capability. It's very much a batteries included platform. And what this means is that even if you've never had experience in automation or systems integration, you have the capabilities and the functions at your fingertips to get started, have a play with, and be productive. Next, it really allows you to tackle the skill shortage. So especially in the UK at the moment, there's a big shortage of software developers. And so firms are now looking at how they can address this shortage without paying exorbitant amounts or outsourcing work where they have less control on the work that is performed, or maybe less control over the quality that is produced. So firms are now looking for solutions that they can bring in-house to tackle this shortage of software developers. Digital transformation is at the core of innovation for so many businesses. And without software developers, that makes that really difficult. So by bringing in a no-code platform, it allows them to actually still address the digital transformation journeys that they want to implement without having to bring in anyone of a kind of software developer, which is especially difficult at the moment. This links nicely onto the fact that no-code can help you reduce your cost and technical debt. Because everything is encapsulated under a single platform, and because you can't modify anything beyond the functionality that is given to you, there's no room for kind of deviation from the standard path, which means that everyone's kind of projects that they develop in a no-code platform end up being similar and much more maintainable as a result of it. Of course, there's room for customization, there's room for kind of personal flair, but it's all within a kind of more constrained kind of bubble, which allows everything to be more consistent and more maintainable. It also reduces the cost. And this is because with a no-code platform, because you can move with more agility, you can move with more speed, and you can tackle areas that you couldn't previously have tackled, you actually don't need as large a team as before, and because everything can be done under this one platform. The last point here really is, just because you have a no-code platform with all these pre-configured blocks, that doesn't mean that you can't make your own bespoke solutions. No-code is about how you plug together these no-code functions, these no-code blocks, to solve business problems and create applications that the end user can benefit from. And there are always many different ways that these no-code blocks can plug together. And because of that, the possibilities and the end solutions can be totally different, and you can customize them for your particular requirement. Now that we've addressed the no-code part of this webinar, we're going to move on to connecting systems. So what do we mean when we say connecting systems? Well, if you think of a typical day in a business, usually it involves email. You may have some sort of CRM platform. Maybe you've got an EPR platform, and you need all of these different pieces of software to talk to each other. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to give you and your business the best experience to be productive and be agile. The problem is many of these different softwares that are typically used by businesses are developed by different people. They're developed under different companies, and so they don't always play nicely with each other. And that's why systems integration, going back to that statistic on the first slide that we looked at, that's why systems integration is such a struggle for companies, especially if you've got more than 100 systems that you're using within your business, and most of them will need to talk to each other at some point, maybe to do with your data flow that represents a business process, or maybe it's about notifying people when something's ready from one system to another. That sort of flow can be much more difficult than it has to be. So the analogy I like to use when I talk about systems integration or connecting systems is that one system it's like when you go traveling and you've got a plug for your laptop or your phone charger, and you go to plug it into the socket in the hotel wall, only to find that the socket is completely different shaped to the plug that you have. And this is very much like the problems that you face when you try to connect systems developed by different people. The connectors are totally different. The interfaces are completely at odds with each other, and it can be almost impossible to try and put the two together. Typically, when you do encounter this, you end up having to write custom scripts, and again, that requires skilled developers usually to do such a thing, and it takes time away, particularly from people with the skills who could be working on much more useful things. Integrating systems probably takes up a lot of a developer's time, when in reality, it's probably one of the least effective uses of their time. So how can we address this? What can we bring in so that what we can actually do is somehow adapt the two systems, or however many systems, so that they can talk and communicate with each other. And that's where an integration layer can come in. So the purpose of an integration layer is that it sits as a sort of middleware or a fabric that you can weave throughout all the systems in your business. What an integration layer allows you to do is effectively mold and adapt one system's interface to match that of another. One example might be you're trying to set up a more automated process around invoices and your payment provider. And so whenever you receive an email which contains an invoice, then what you actually in reality want to do is somehow extract the data off that invoice and then send it off to a payment provider like Xero or something like that. And it might be that those systems can talk to each other, but more often than not, they can't. And that's where an integration layer can become invaluable. The other benefit of an integration layer is that the alternative is to customize and have bespoke solutions for each different system connection. And that can build up technical debt. It can require the right skilled people. It can also become very expensive and push back the delivery of systems and projects within a business by a massive amount. And this comes back then to a no-code platform. So can we marry the two worlds and have a no-code integration layer? And that is effectively what we as a business are trying to address. So when we think about integrating systems, in my mind, they fall under two different categories. You've got legacy interfaces where it might be that you're trying to integrate with a system that has no external access. It has no database that you can connect to. It has no API that you can write a connector for. It has no form of access. So with legacy interfaces, you might have to resort to kind of a more traditional approach of integration. This might be something like RPA or robotic process automation. It might be using technology like optical character recognition or OCR, which will allow you to read text from a screen. It might be a more traditional screen scraping style of automation, which will allow you to collect data and then inject it to the relevant system later on. Legacy interfaces are often the most challenging because you don't have the kind of more commonly established routes of connecting, like a database or an API that we have in modern day applications. It can be really difficult. If you were trying to extract data from a PDF or maybe a scanned image, which represents an invoice, then it's very difficult to get that data out without requiring a person or a human to actually sit in the middle and read that data manually before manually entering it onto a different system. The other type of interface we have are the more modern ones. These tend to be easier to integrate with, but can still pose challenges. Some typical interfaces that we might see nowadays are stuff like email connections, database connectors, RESTful or SOAP APIs, which allow us to make calls over the web to integrate with different systems. And finally, users. So being able to collect information directly from users, be it through web applications or a mobile app or anything like that. But whilst these tend to be easier to integrate with each other, they still have their difficulties and challenges. And that's because if we extract data from one system, we still need to manipulate it and transform it before we push it out to the other system. We need to somehow normalize and mold and transform that data before we can then push it into another system. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at a couple of examples of the Toca platform in action where it's addressing this system integration problem with its no-code platform. So what I'm going to do is share another tab. So you should all now be able to see a different page, and we're actually on our Toca platform here. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at two different kind of ways of integrating systems. And we've got some pre-built examples which we're going to go through. And this will also bring to life the no-code descriptions that we covered at the start of the webinar. Let's start by diving into an activity which contains these no-code steps. We'll start by going to our application interaction activity here. So the use case that I'm going to go through here is effectively allowing us to get data from a website that's not available through any other means. And then we're going to store it so that we can use it later on, either for querying, or maybe we're going to write this data to another platform. And what you can notice is that we have these steps down on the left-hand panel. And each one of these steps represents a no-code block. So this first step is going to open a browser to the web page that we require. So as we run that step, we can see that it's opened the browser to the page that I've asked it to. The next thing we want to do is interact with this page, so we navigate not only to the standard vehicles, car hire rates, but all of them. So we're going to play this step, and you can see it's clicked on the all button, which now returns us a full table of all of the different hire rates for vehicles, dependent on, so all the hire rates for the vehicles that this particular website has on offer. Next, what we want to do is extract the data from this browser. So if we jump into interactive view to see, as we scroll down the page, we can see that there are hundreds of rows of data, and somehow we need to extract this. Now, traditionally, this would be quite difficult. We would have had to kind of hand coded up to this point, and kind of there's no easy way of doing this. And even if I was manually performing this task, there's no easy way for me to extract this data, this table of data that contains all of our hire rates. But in our no-code platform, it's simply a question of placing down a single step, and it can extract all of this data for us. So here we can see it's pulled out 829 rows of data. Now what we can do is we can close the browser, because we've kind of got the data that we need, and we're going to upload that table that we've just extracted to a data store. And a data store sits within the Toca platform, and simply all it does is it acts like a database. So we can edit this, and we can see showing me all 800 and however many rows there were of data that we've extracted from that website. And this is now stored, and it's ready for me to use in a number of different ways. It might be that I want to query this, so I want to build an app around this data to allow people to search what their hire rate would be for a particular model of car. Equally, it might be that we want to have this data readily available for people to integrate with and query themselves. It might also be that we simply want to write this data to an Excel file or a CSV and upload it to SharePoint. Whatever the next step of the process is, we've been able to integrate with this system, with this car hire system, and we've been able to pull out the data that we require, and it's now ready to be integrated into another system, all without having to write a single line of code. We'll now look at another example, which covers the invoice example that I was discussing earlier. So in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to go through an Outlook inbox until we find an email which has an invoice attached to it. Once we've found that email, we're going to download the attachment. We're going to open it as it's going to be a PDF. And then we're going to read the data from the screen. This is because a PDF could be anything like a scanned image of a document or something like that, which makes it very difficult to extract the data from it. Luckily, with Toca's NoCode platform, what you have is you have capabilities and functionality like OCR built right into it. So you don't need someone who's an expert, or you don't need someone who knows how to do this in code. This capability is now available to anyone who uses the platform. So what we'll do is we'll change our machine so we can see it appear on the desktop here. And what we'll do is, the first thing we'll do is we'll list our emails and retrieve the one that has an invoice in it. The next thing we're going to do is download the invoice. And if we just have a look, so we can see that from the list of emails, the second one here had an invoice. So what we can do is say, I want to download the email, which appears in the second row, and download it to the desktop. So if we do that, we can see a new file has appeared on the desktop. And what we want to do now is open that file. So we can open the file. We want to always open PDFs with Chrome. And now what we want to do is somehow we need to read that table of contents so that we can extract that data. So the way we can do that, as discussed, is using a technology called OCR, or optical character recognition. And what this allows me to do is run this step. And then if we have a look at our data, we can see it's pulled out all of the text and it's been able to structure it. So not only has it been able to read the text, but it's also been able to make sense of it. This is really important in terms of data cleanliness and data quality, because if this was something like a scanned image or a scanned document which came through as an image, we can actually maintain the structure of the original document without losing any quality. So once we've got those, once we have that table extracted, so we can see here, we've got description and amount, and it all looks correct. We want to close the browser. And then finally, we want to convert this table to a format that we can send to a payment provider like Xero, which will look something like this. This is called JSON that it's converted it to. And then lastly, we can enter the invoice details to Xero. So we can do that using this action. I don't have a Xero sandbox stood up at the moment, so I won't play this particular step. But hopefully what this illustrates and gets across to everyone here is that actually we've integrated many different systems here in terms of we've been able to read emails from an Outlook inbox. We've then been able to extract the data that typically would have required either separate software to extract and process, or it would have required someone manually reviewing and processing the data from the invoice. And then lastly, we can integrate and send it to a financial piece of software like Xero or something similar, which allows us then to build these automated integrations, these automated flows, which then relieve any kind of manual efforts. But we've been able to do so in only a handful of steps. And if we had to write this from scratch in code, this would have taken much longer than it took me to put this activity together. So hopefully this demonstrates that NoCode can really speed up your process from initial designs all the way through to having something production ready that can help you integrate and connect many different systems that sit across your business, but not only your business, but maybe other businesses as well.